Hi guys, today I would like to explain you the differentiation between our MAAT mastering EQ family. So many students and also customers ask me, how do I decide what EQ to use in what situation? And in this video I just want to focus on the differences and why we have these different EQs, and not dig so much into absolute EQ essentials. So look out for another video which will come out soon, where I speak more about understanding EQ technology basics, which is important. So the more you understand about the technology and benefits and disadvantages of different technologies, the easier it is for you to choose the right EQ in a particular situation. Here I will give you a brief overview, so let me go over to Wavelab, and I'm going to start with the blue EQ. So the blue EQ is basically my aesthetical EQ. It's a minimal phase machine. Minimal phase is a pretty bad term for my personal opinion. Minimal phase means it mimics the behavior of an analog EQ, so you could say it's a maximum phase EQ. Phase is basically the secret source of an EQ, and basically 95% or something of all EQs you use are minimal phase EQs. So all EQs which mimic analog EQs and all digital EQs which are not labeled as linear phase are minimal phase. And basically minimal phase means that the phase changes are the secret source, so to say, of changing the frequency response of the audio. This is very important to understand. I just want to give you a very, very brief introduction into that. So this is Plugin Doctor. Plugin Doctor is a very neat tool to understand plugins, basically to measure plugins and also to measure hardware, which can be done here. I just want to show you something very crucial here, for example, based on the Santa Cruz EQ, which is in terms of DSP and sound quality one-to-one the same as the blue EQ. It has just a limited functionality, so it's more designed as a universal mixing EQ. I use it all the time in my mixing projects because it's very fast, it's very slim in terms of CPU, and it sounds really, really gorgeous. But here I just want to show you the phase response. Here, if I use a 6 dB per octave low cut filter, which is also called a first order low cut, you can see here in the phase response graph that we have a 90-degree phase change. If I go further to 12 dB per octave, second order, you go up to 180-degree phase shift. So you need to understand the disadvantages of different EQs in order to use them in the right situation. Here the clear disadvantage of this cut filter is that you have a 180-degree low cut, and if I crank it up here to 100 to higher frequency, you can see this low frequency area. So here we are at 30 hertz, here we are at 50 hertz. This here is almost, it's not 180 degree shifted, it's 160 degree-ish shifted, but it's still a whole lot shifted. And phase changes are temporal changes, meaning changes on the time axis of the audio. Let's say you want to treat a secondary kick when you do kick layering, which means the bass response is quite delayed, while the attack of the kick is on original time with no time shift, basically. And this has an effect of blurring the transients, meaning if you use it in a wrong way, it could cause a situation where the attack, the higher frequency components, come first and the bass would come later. So you would not want to use very steep cut filters, as you can see, for example, if you deal with parallel processing when you layer several kicks. in your electronic music production, for example. This is not beneficial. You just need to be aware about this phase changes, and basically this fact is the reason why all mastering hardware, low cuts and boutique hardware gear, so if you buy a massive passive for 10 grand, the hardware, then you find a low cut switch, and the low cut switch is 60 dB per octave. It's 90 degree. 90 degree is okay. In terms of phase problems, it's not so noticeable. You would never find a 12 dB per octave low cut, minimal phase low cut in the world of mastering. You just want to be aware that all changes I do here affect phase, right? Just as a quick thing. And the steeper you are, the more phase, etc., etc. And the shell filter would give you another phase response. So if I go here to high shelf, I go here, and you can see it's instantly here that this has an impact on what's going on in the world of the phases here. So one other interesting fast thing just to show it. So here I'm still at 6 dB per octave, 31 hertz, and let me go to 30 hertz. So straightforward, you see the phase response here. And plug-in doctor, we can use two things. So this color is unfortunately pretty close. However, so if I do this here, and I go here also to 30 hertz, bam, you can see it's absolutely identical. In other words, a good digital model of a good analog EQ would always give you the same phase response. And for that reason, it's important to understand that we tend to use analog tools, let me just get rid of that, more for gentle things. So if I use this, for example, in mastering, the blue, so I use the blue EQ more for aesthetical soft changes. I avoid to do very, very, very steep heavy dips, because very heavy dips would create heavy phase changes. Let's say I want to support the vocals. I would solo here and I would listen for the lead vocals, and oh, here's this nice sweet spot to support the lead vocals, to support the speech comprehensibility, to give it a little bit more air, whatsoever. I can use it here. For example, let me go and make a high shelf. I would do a high shelf on the difference, and I could gently here crank up the difference signal, the side signal, a little bit in the highs, which gives a little bit sparkling. It's always a good idea to zoom in a little bit, that you have a natural sense to not overdo things. So by zooming in and mastering, you can actually often go to 6 dB or even 3 dB of range. So this holds you back from doing crazy stuff. And this tiny phase changes help sometimes really to open up the stereo image. So it's a positive side effect. You can compare that possibly with good crosstalk from microphone signals. A good recording engineer would make crosstalk the friend and use it in the production in a nice fashion. The same we can do with picking the right EQ by choosing a minimal phase EQ. Basically, I choose to accept phase things, and by using gentle curves, I can open up the image automatically a little bit due to the phase changes, which is pretty nice, rather than destroying the phase scenario by doing very extreme things. So one final comment or introduction of a term, this phase changes you could see with the low cut, it's called group delay. It means that we have different delays in different frequency areas. And this is basically the reason why classic audio engineers would not use the blue EQ to do things in the mastering process, so they would go for a linear phase EQ. In general, I go more for gentle curves, and just as a side information, when you look deeper into the blue, we cover basically 12 different topologies. So this is more like an SSL style EQ, and we cover all different things from Neve through Marsalek, through GML, George Massenburg 9500, which is this one, and Massive Passive, which is this one, etc., etc. So it's a real universal curve machine, and you can basically cover all scenarios with that. And on top of that, you have this fader function. Here's no space to look into that. I'm gonna make an extra video about that. And let's look into the orange EQ and why and when I would use the orange EQ and how it works. The interesting thing about the orange EQ is that the orange EQ is a linear phase EQ, but it's based on the same technology of this analog minimal phase EQs. The only difference of the orange EQ is that the EQ is linear phase by calculating the EQing forward and then backward. The input signal is chunked into little tiny chunks. It's chopped. One chunk is EQ'd forward and then backward, and by EQing it backward, the phase is neutralized, and we get a linear phase EQ. There are two purposes for me. The one is low cut. It's this low cut filter which comes out from this strange technology is called Lindquist-Riley filter. It's a relatively steep filter, 24 dB per octave, and the benefit of this Lindquist-Riley filter is it goes infinitely down and it does not ripple, and it creates a very tight bass. The general difference between minimal phase EQs like the blue and linear phase EQs is both have ringing, and the ringing of minimal phase EQ is more discrete because it's post-ringing. So when you have an event like a transient BAM, then the ringing comes after the event. Thus, it's psychoacoustically covered, because when you have a loud event, the hearing is deaf for a very short moment. This is the principle which was used by MP3 and AAC to reduce data. So ringing is a natural artifact of EQs. All EQs have that. So if you go very high here and you would sweep around, you have that ringing. It's normal. You have that always. In order to create a linear phase, the ringing is shifted forward, basically. There are no linear phase EQs in the analog world. It's not possible. Usually you don't want to use linear phase EQs for low cutting. Never do that except with thEQorange. And so people thought I am crazy when we released this EQ, and I would tell that. And then Bob Katz came around and was kind enough to state in an American audio magazine that, damn, I'm right. It's the really fucking tightest low-cut EQ you find on planet Earth. And this is why I love this EQ. It's always in mastering when I run into a situation where I have an uncontrolled bass area and I need to clean it up. I go for the orange EQ, and sometimes I would go here for something like 0.8 Q or 0.81. So then 0.83, then I have a tiny bump here in the 30 Hertz area. When I zoom in here, you can see that it's about a little bit less than 1 dB at 36 6 hertz with the highest thing, this overshoot here. It's a really nice low-end support, and on the other hand, you get rid of stuff you don't need. And due to the absence of phase changes, you don't have the so-called group delay. In other words, the bass comes at the same time as the high. So the beater portion, it must come like like this in the same moment. This is great for that. And the other main purpose I use it for is getting rid, so you can zoom in here when you work your audio, and I would use it to look for certain resonances, and when you find a resonance, you can lock it to the note where you hear it. So basically you can also hear the notes when you play the keyboard here. And this is beautiful and fast. And one very important and crucial thing here with the Orange EQ, never ever go crazy. Basically, I can also, when I find this is the perfect frequency and I want to figure out how much gain I want to change, I can lock it with control, and then I have an easy time to play around here, right? And I can listen to the whole difference of the EQ, which is also great. I can listen to the negative difference and to the positive difference, which is very helpful. However, don't go super crazy, like sometimes I see people go like this, and no, you don't want to do that, because when you go crazy, it's like you get to a point where you can hear pre-ringing. It's not that the EQ has no pre-ringing, it's simply when you use it purposefully, you don't hear pre-ringing. That's the point. I never ever have used it or overused it, like really go crazy here. And listen to the sound examples I provide for download on the Orange product page, and you can hear that when you work your master carefully and you get carefully rid of resonances, the result sounds as if it was not EQ'd, as opposed to before when it sounds badly EQ'd. It's a very funny thing. It sounds more natural. It sounds so organic and nice. So I just want to apply my clean up things as less invasive as I can, so to say. It goes down to the fact that no EQing is the best EQing, so a great recording is the best deal you can get. And when you do EQ, you always pay, and with a blue you pay with phase, but you don't pay with phase when you just do it gently, then you get a nice phase response. And with the Orange EQ you pay with pre-ringing, but you don't get pre-ringing when you use it meaningful. And you keep things tight. So this is basically the main thing. You keep transients very tight and transparent. The signal sounds like having more ease. It's check it out on your own. It's very, very nice. So the last EQ in the family is the Red EQ. And the Red EQ is also a linear phase EQ, but with a completely different technology. So it's FFT based, but the fast Fourier transformation is a proprietary development, and it's as all the EQs, it's an 80-bit precision internal calculation. It's the highest precision you can get in these days audio workstations. So the basic functionalities are the same, but you have a few particularities. Throughout the journey, I figured out that some technologies are more advantageous for particular things than other technologies, and it's impossible to combine all these technologies in one EQ. So this is not done in any EQ. Usually EQ manufacturers or plugin designers decide to go for one technology and mimic different behaviors, but it would not be practicable to have all three EQs in one EQ. It's not possible. One very interesting thing about the red EQ is this variable slope thing. It's very, very nice, and I use it for classic music. It's a beast of an EQ in terms of latency. When you go to the best resolution here, the extra resolution, it's like working with 65,000 bins, but internally we calculate everything with such a high precision that it's a real CPU sucker, so it's more like a mastering EQ. Sometimes I also use it in mixing, but then I simply calculate it into the file. This is really the best EQ I know in the world of aesthetical linear phase EQs for classic mastering, for chamber music, for everything which comes with strings. And once again, if we look back to the Santa Cruz here, the Santa Cruz is just the little brother here of our blue EQ. It's just limited to 6 bands without having the choice here to toggle between left, right, stereo, mono, and difference. But it covers basically 95% of all situations in a regular mixing project, and it's crazy fast to work with this EQ because you also have the keyboard. You can play it and you instantly hear, oh, here we go, and you're so fast. Okay, so this is the basic differentiation between our 3 EQs. Thank you very much and have a nice day. Bye.